be able to allow you to speak. We'll pick this up in the meeting. The meeting is also being live streamed and recorded by the council for subsequent broadcast via the council internet site. Can panel members introduce themselves and any cabinet members state their portfolio area? Yes, please. Can we start over from the left? And can any speakers and officers, both in person and online, introduce themselves when speaking? So I'll go via the left first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Jess Crowe. I'm Director of Culture, Strategy and Engagement.
Hi, my name's Emily Arkan. I'm the Cabinet Lead for Culture, Communities and Leisure.
Yeah, hi, I'm Barry Francis. I'm the Director of Environment and Resident Experience.
Mike Kakata, Cabinet Member for Climate Action, Environment and Transport.
Rob Szosowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Councillor Chandwani, Cabinet Member for Resident Services and Tackling Inequality.
John O'Keefe, Head of Finance for Capital Place and Economy.
Councillor Ilridge Cumberwell.
Councillor Luke Colley Harrison, Crouch End Ward.
Councillor Liam Carroll, White Hart Lane.
Ian Sygrave, Co-opted Member.
Councillor George Tunstall, Stroud Green.
Aisha Simsip, Democratic Services Manager.
Bushra Begum, Democratic Service.
Okay, then. Thank you very much for all those introductions. I've seen there's quite a few people online, so I'm not going to ask you to introduce yourselves online at this particular moment. Apologies for absence.
We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Ali and apologies for lateness from Councillor Corley Harrison. And Councillor Adamu is joining online.
Thank you very much. Is there any urgent business? There is one item, and in relation to item 8, Community Safety and Hate Crime Strategy, we have received communication from the Cabinet Member, Community Safety and Cohesion, on the need to engage with members further and more widely on the final strategy. There will be an all members briefing session arranged in early January 2024 to allow members to consider the comment on the strategy. Given this is a budget and policy framework document, I've sought advice from Democratic Services, who advise that the strategy can go to scrutiny and cabinet in February to reach a full council in March. That's thanks to Philip. He really briefed me on that. Thank you very much. Therefore, we can agree we do not consider the report at this moment and defer the report. Is this agreed? Thank you very much. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? None? Okay. Deputations, petitions, presentations, questions? There have been no deputation, petitions, presentations, or questions received. And I'll move swiftly on to item number 6, which is the minutes. And I'd like to know, are the minutes of the previous meeting agreed? Councillor Crawley Harrison?
Yeah, there was just the amendment on the minutes about the dockless bikes rather than in the work programme rather than doctor bike. It's on page 6.
Page 6?
Page 6, yeah.
Okay.
Page 6 of the pack,
Okay.
section 243.
Thank you. Aisha, can you make a note of that to be able to amend that? Thank you very much. Any other amendments? No? Okay, agreed. Scrutiny of 2024-25 draft budget and 5-year medium-term financial strategy. And it reads as follows. As members will be aware, at this meeting, we will be putting forward recommendations on the budget concerning climate and community. The process for tonight will be as follows. John O'Keel will provide a short overview of the main budget report and its key considerations, and will also refer to the climate and community related budget set out on page 15 to 24 of the agenda pack. I will then take questions on this introduction information, and then we will proceed to consider each appendix separately. That will help me to keep my trail of thought as well. With cabinet members and officers introducing the information, panel members then asking questions to them, followed by panel members indicating recommendations. I would also like to direct the panel members to attention to Appendix 1, page 25 to 26, which has the key lines of inquiry for the budget setting, and would advise panel members to keep this as a reference point when asking questions and indicating recommendations. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. Do members have any questions? Any questions? Okay. John, please can you now introduce Appendix 2? That's 2024 to 2025 draft budget and the 2024 to 2029 medium-term financial strategy report, which is on page 27 of the agenda pack, and also the climate and community related budget set out at page 15 to 24. Are there any questions from the panel members? Okay, so it's over to you, John. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Councillor. Cabinet at its meeting on the 5th of December considered two key financial reports. The first one was the Q2 budget monitor, and the next one was the budget proposals and the MTFS that you have in front of you this evening. I mentioned the Q2 because that provides some context for what comes afterwards in the 24-25 budget position. As at Q2, the authority overall on its general fund was forecasting to overspend by £20.8 million. And predominantly this was to do with the care services, adults and children's, and some and overspends in temporary accommodation. That pressure has flowed through into the 24-25 budget. And if you read the papers, you'll find out that there's been additional growth placed into the 25 budget to deal with the social care pressures and demands that we face. In relation to Q2 and the remit of the scrutiny panel, I'm pleased to say that there was a minor overspend in this area. Two large ones in the libraries arena and the operational facilities management, which were offset by overspend elsewhere. So in the context of the overall budget, not a particularly significant overspend, although we said officers should continue to work to reduce that down to zero. On 24-25, I think the authority, the council now, like in common with many authorities, has found this particularly challenging budget round. There are a whole raft of factors set out in the report that tell us why the budget is been so difficult. There's inflation, there's interest rates, there's demand for services over and above that which we expected. So as at the 5th of December, the budget report had a budget gap of £16.3 million, despite the work that had gone on during the course of the year, and despite the significant savings that have been built into the budget already and new savings that were generated. This is an unprecedented situation to find ourselves in. It's not happened before. Process now is that officers and members will continue to work on options to reduce the budget gap. And that's going to happen between now and when we have the report in February. The council is under a legal obligation to set a balanced budget, and it will for 24-25. That review will look at both the revenue budgets and options that we have, additional income and reductions in expenditure, and the review will continue to look at the general fund revenue, the general fund capital programme, as that gives rise to a direct financial consequence that affects the revenue budget. As I say, that work is continuing. We've already done quite a lot with the general fund budget. If you compare the March 23 position to the December 23 position, the budget has been, the capital programme has been reduced by some £396 million, which reflects both the desire to reduce the cost of the programme and also to reduce the overall indebtedness of the council, which is increasingly seen as being used as a metric for the government to monitor local authorities. There are two prongs to that attack. Now, in relation to this area, the service area in particular, if I just talk about the savings for 24-25, well, this is a mixture of savings and income, net income generation. Predominantly, the income generation part of the 24-25 budget sits in a review of fees and charges in parking, and that itself has three components that are laid out in the report. And there are operational changes proposed in the library service, which come to something in the region of £0.67 million. And there are some minor other ones which will bring the total up to £2.1 million. The capital programme for this particular area, it's set out in appendix. Yeah, that is the starts on page, I think, 91 of your programme. So this sets out the capital expenditure proposals for the scrutiny panel committee's remit. You will notice that there have been a number of additions, despite the situation that we find ourselves in. There have been a number of additions to the capital programme that have, at this particular moment in time, been deemed essential, and those are set out on pages 91 to 92. At that point, I think it's possible I'd like to pause and maybe take any questions about that general overview.
The floor is open for questions. Councillor Dunstall, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. You have to forgive my ignorance. This is only my second budget round here, but you did just say something I thought was quite interesting or quite concerning, I guess. You mentioned that it's unprecedented at this point to still have that deficit, right? Does that, you mean it's unprecedented to be at this point in the year where we're setting budgets and still not have achieved a proposal for a balanced budget? Is that what you were saying?
If I may clarify that, it's the quantum that we're looking at. You can quite easily at this stage, you could have a small budget gap where you could think about almost $1 million, 1.2 million, and that's sort of not unusual, and that happens. To have one that is £16 million is very unusual, and I should have contextualised that by saying that. Sorry.
Please go ahead and follow up before I ask a question. Thanks.
And I guess my question off the back of that is, have we spoken or are we aware of other local authorities and where we're sort of sitting in that? I mean, you know, I know that other local authorities are struggling and many have already issued Section 114s and all of that stuff, but are other comparable local authorities looking at sort of comparable situations, or are we worse, better? Or...
Okay, I don't know that we have done that piece of work. My colleague Francis, who's on the line, may have done so and may have some information that may be helpful to you. I think she is, yes? Yeah.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I just put my camera on. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. We haven't done any specific comparison. It's more, I would say, an informal data sharing across London boroughs, where we've shared information not only about the gaps in the current year, but also their forecast gaps going forward, their assumptions around inflation. So it's a more informal basis, but I would say we aren't alone in looking at gaps this size in London.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Anybody else for questions? Okay, Councillor Crawley Harrison, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, John. I just wanted to delve a little bit into the overspend on FM this year, and if you can explain what the cause of that is and what's being done about that next year. Is the budget for the coming year on FM going to increase than what was proposed for this year? Thanks.
Barry, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can answer that. Thank you very much. Yes, there's a combination of a couple of things in OFM. Some of them were associated with the transfer of staff into the in-house, so it's around harmonisation costs and bringing staff into line with the organisation. And some of it was around backdated charges for, I think it was to do with either rents or taxes, I think, that came back through from previous accounting year that hit us this year, so they were unbudgeted. In terms of bringing next year in line, there is quite an extensive plan in place to look at the recharges, because it is around, most of the OFM service, for people who don't know, is around recharging our sort of our security, catering, cleaning services back into the organisation. So there is a rebasing of what those charges are to make sure that they are equivalent to what the actual true cost is. And there's also a review of some of the externalised costs. So, for example, we charge North London Waste Authority an amount for some of the work we do with them, and there's a review of whether or not that is cost recovery or where it should be in terms of bringing the income in. So there is work underway to make sure that next year there isn't an additional pressure on the organisation and that the pressure is mitigated.
Go ahead. Is that a follow-up question?
Yes, please. Is there any plans to restructure FM at all? That has been discussed in previous years. Just wondering whether that's potentially part of the budget setting for the coming year.
So there's nothing in the current programme that looks at formal restructuring, but there is always going to be an ongoing review of optimised levels of service, looking at vacancies, looking at how we deploy and use of staff effectively. But there isn't anything in the current plan in terms of restructuring at the moment.
Thank you. I have one question. Can you please explain to me about the Libraries Hub ICT public access? From 2024, it's 600, I think, and then it drops down to 350 on page 92. What's this? Well, how comes there's such a drastic change in that spend?
This is initial investment in ICT. If we're to use these hubs, we have to gear them up to be as they are, to be able to respond, and that equates to a lot of spending at the beginning, which tails off once as we've done the investment in it, and then it will be part and parcel. It will be built into budgets going forward about the refresh and the running costs and all that. It's the initial capital investment.
And what does that look like? Is that going to be a reduction in services? Libraries, ITC buildings, is that going to be a reduction in the service provision, or is this just a concrete thing?
If I can help, Chair. Yeah, it's as John said, it's a sort of initial capital investment. I think it's part of the new library system that we put in, and there's the one-off capital investment, and then it's just the running costs of the system. So it shouldn't be a diminution. So it's just like it costs more to put it in, but then the running cost is less each year.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Are there any more questions from the floor, please? Councillor Coral.
Hi, on the Alexandra Palace investor draft capital proposal, is the amount, obviously this is as part of a self-financing borrowing situation subject to a business case, based on the ability of the investment to generate additional income. Is that additional income levied directly to the scheme or to Alexandra Palace, the trust in general? Because obviously, as we know, there are question marks over how Alexandra Palace as a whole's ability to generate an income for the council, or is it levied as a certain amount that would need to be paid back in each individual year, regardless of whether the trust at large was creating an income?
Okay, so currently the council pays a grant to Alexandra Palace of 1.755 million and £470,000 of recurrent capital investment in order to maintain the building. This particular investment proposal is subject to a business case. That business case will show that after the operational expenditure, there is sufficient money left to pay back the debt and the associated interest. To the extent that there is money left over from that, then that would be used to offset the running costs of the Alexander Park and of the APPCT. Yep.
Very much. Is there any other questions from the floor? If not, then I'll move on. And Finance Officers now introduce Appendix 3, MTFS Savings Tracker 2022 to 2023, and also 2025 to 2026, which is on page 87 of the agenda pack. Also highlighting for the record and for members' attention, the updated description P120/22 visitors vouchers pricing structure, and also providing an updated comments PL20/38 moving traffic PC end. Please can cabinet members add their comments and make additions. Please can the panel members put forward any questions, keeping in mind the. Okay, so I'll leave it for that. Can the finance officers introduce Appendix 3? Thank you.
Okay, this is the normal MTSS savings tracker for 23-24 and forms part and parcel of the normal budget monitoring routine and cycle that Directorate's undertaken that Cabinet is reported to. Apologies for the error. We're not sure how that got into the system. I think anyway. I won't comment on how that may or may not have got into the system. So what we have here, as I say, is thankfully a considerable number of green and red savings proposals tracking, which are indicating that those savings are sound, they're being delivered, and they're doing as they should do. We have the notable exception, I think, of the area HGV restriction zone and the enforcement site, and we could tell here the reasons for that: delayed implementation, and due to pressures in managing the LTN camera vandalism. As you know, the LTNs have generated a fair degree of activity, which has diverted management time and effort to that rather than to delivering on other items such as these savings. So I think, and apart from, I'm not sure if there's anything else that I would care to say at this particular moment in time.
Can cabinet members add their comments or make any additions to what the budget strategy is here in front of us on page 87?
Yeah, can I just ask if you've got, there's quite a lot of proposals here. Is there any specific questions on specific proposals you have?
No, I don't have any specific questions at this moment. I'm just asking if you've got anything to add to what's here. Particularly the red ones, the red items. I'd like some expansion on those.
Okay, so I'll go first because I think the first red item is mine, which is PL20/22, which is visitor vouchers pricing structure. The description, as most of you have just figured out, is about mechanical sweeping, so that's obviously some sort of error. However, if you look in the column where it gives comment on delivery of RAG status, I think it kind of tries to explain to you that we also converted to paperless permits. And if I can just expand on what that means, because it says that we have basically lost income based on bulk buying. So when we used to sell, put this in English, when we used to sell scratch cards, people used to turn up at the library and buy about 1,000 of them and then go off with them. We all know what they've done with them. They sold them. They sold them to people that weren't meant to have them. Funny enough, very, very popular around Spurs stadiums, those scratch cards. Now that we have all digitalized, people can't tangibly buy something like that. So the most they can do is activate 2 at any one time on their Toronto paperless account. So they can't sell it, and or if they were trying to sell it, they were only able to sell 2 at any one time. So when Spurs beat Arsenal, at a match, people can only sell two. Sorry for any Arsenal fans offended, but I'm not really that sorry. But if people can only buy two vouchers at any one time instead of 1,000, and therefore at best could probably make 20 quid. So what we did see is we saw a massive drop in people being able to do that. And because people can't buy 1,000 vouchers anymore, we don't get paid for 1,000 vouchers. So our income went down. So that's why that bit is red. And I think the second one that's red is the.
And I just ask you one thing on that, please, Councillor Chandwali. I'm from a different era, so I struggle with digital things anyway. And I'm just asking, is there any provision still for residents to go into Tottenham Green and to go into the library and get paper vouchers?
I was really hoping you would ask me this question, Councillor Simmons Sappho. Two things I want to say on there. The first question, to answer your question bluntly, is yes. And we have a lot of residents that come in and they buy a book of vouchers and they carry on. What we had noticed though is that people, apart from those that might be selling paper vouchers to football fans, is we actually found that the other reason that people were buying a considerable amount of visitor vouchers is because they had care at home. And so what we realized was people were coming in, probably buying about 200 a week. And then when we asked them, what are you doing with it? Then they said, oh, you know, my mum has 5 carers coming a day and they all need a visitor voucher. And actually, that's quite unfair. You shouldn't be having an extra fine. So we now have a care at home permit. It lasts for 3 years. It's a card. And so again, we are seeing a drop in people buying vouchers, but we already costed that into the budget. But in answer to your question, it's more likely those people who needed care at home and needed regular vouchers were also the same ones struggling to go online. And every time their carer came, trying to fiddle a little bit, what's your registration number, etc. So instead of just kind of looking at the digital issue and how to resolve that, actually we've resolved the whole issue of people needing to have visitor permits that they need to pay for in the first place for care at home. However, if anyone is digitally struggling but doesn't need it for care at home, they can still go into the customer service centre, or they can phone up and book purchase permits, and it gets sent and posted to their home, and they can pay that online.
Well, thank God for that, because I'm that one. Thank you very much. I was beginning to panic there. Okay, the next red one is, I think, is that you as well, Seema? Oh no, that's the H.
That is me.
Okay.
Can you please forgive me? This is actually font 2 on my sheet. It's really difficult.
I can barely see it myself.
So what we had said here is that we did delay the implementation of this because we also had the LTNs rolling out at the same time. LTNs, as you know, is something that is enforced by cameras. And so the ANPR cameras that are put up, it's exactly the same team that is also needing to put up HGV cameras. So there's only so many hours in the day, and they have rolled out 3 massive LTNs across the borough, and therefore, as a consequence, their workload didn't allow them to achieve this. But we're still working towards it, and I think when you see the rest of the year pan out, and as the tracker pans out through the MTFS period, you'll see us catch up on that, but that's why it's red.
Thank you very much for that, Seema. That's been very, very helpful. I'm wondering if any of the other officers would like to contribute to their part in relation to the financial structure here on this page. If not, then can I ask the panel members can put forward questions, keeping in mind the guidance on Appendix 1 and the potential recommendations they may want to be explored. And I've seen Councillor Crawley Harrison's hand is up first, so please go ahead.
Just before moving to recommendations, can I just get clarity on PL 20/38, because the red comment on that one is a duplicate from the top one. So if you can just explain the 60k shortfall on that one, please.
To be honest, I can barely see it. That would be great if you can, John.
So the red rating is where we're not making the saving at all. Okay. The amber rating indicates that we're making a saving, but not that which we thought it was going to be. And the green is obviously that we're making the saving in full. So that'll be the differentiation between them, why they're like that. As to the reason, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah.
Hi, I think there's somebody online that would like to give some clarification. Steve, please go ahead. Mark, sorry.
Mark Stevens, Assistant Director, Direct Services. There has been a transcription error in the report on this one, which Francis flagged up earlier on to myself and to Philip. Effectively, the text in that column is incorrect. What it should say is original assumptions have changed, reduced cameras, e.g. number of cameras in zones. There's a higher number of expected exemptions, which has increased the number of cancellations, and a higher volume of challenge representations, as well as sustained vandalism. So that was actually in a previous report, and it should have been reflected in this report as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crawley, please come back in again.
So just for clarity, Mark, that's the exact same comment or explanation as the one further down on school streets and LTN. That we should read it as the same reasoning.
That's correct, Councillor, yes. Because it's the same sort of situation where the cameras are being applied in both instances. So we get more challenges and more vandalism. We're seeing vandalism across a number of cameras, including ones on the LTNs. So that the income has not matched what we thought it was going to in that respect.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Okay. I'm going to if there's no questions, is there any potential recommendations you might want to explore considering this? Councillor Crawley and Councillor Dunstall first, please. I think your hand went up first.
Thanks. Sorry, might be more of a question than a recommendation, but it's quite difficult to. Well, let's start again. With the HGV, the last red one, ENSAV 001, delayed implementation, HGV zones, all of that stuff. What am I looking at here? It's telling me that we anticipated the 574 saving. We haven't achieved that to a significant level because of the LTN stuff. Looking forward, it's then we're gonna what's the 50? What that I'm looking at there? That it's going to cost us. We've lost again 50k.
Yeah, it's because we're not making that was a budgeted saving, which is now no longer going to be made as a result of this particular circumstance that we find ourselves in. So that will be built into the MTFS now.
Just to clarify, Councillor Dunstall, we are doing it though. It's not something we've abandoned. We are going to carry on rolling out more HGV cameras in HGV zones, and that started. but I guess sometimes there's a difference between a budget proposal and a service proposal. So it is being done, and I believe it's been reaccounted for, but in this period, which we're being tracked on, it's understood by the way that finance have placed it, that we are not, we're not going to achieve it in the timeframe that we said we were.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crawley, do you still have a, Harrison, do you still have a question or recommendation?
Yeah, question first, which was on nighttime enforcement. I think that had started this year, so just wondering what the figures, why we're at zero, basically. I can see it's been built into the MTFS, but why we're at zero for this year. And then a recommendation just for this spreadsheet, which is, it'd be helpful if they all had descriptions. I know it's probably going to add a bit of work, but for example, just picking one, not recruiting to existing vacancies. I can understand the saving there, that's self-explanatory, but it'd be useful for us to know what vacancies we are that we're not filling to make that saving, where that's, and what the implications of that are, because we're just seeing it as a finance line rather than the implication on the council. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So you're right, we do have nighttime enforcement. Yes, it has started. It predominantly started in the Wood Green area, mainly around Wood Green High Road. It's spreaded to kind of more Tottenham, and now it's borough-wide, and we've asked residents to tell us where it's happening. It's mainly happening around where there's a nighttime economy, whether it's Green Lanes, Muswell Hill, Tottenham High Road, Wood Green. The reason that there is a 0.0 figure here is it's a cost neutral service. We have to pay staff. We've got to pay them to work until 1 o'clock in the morning. They have to work in groups because of safety. So they drive around in a minibus and they drive around collectively together for their own protection and safety. So I'm going to leave John to explain why he uses the formula they do to explain finance. But I guess what I'm trying to just say in a layperson's is we make as much money as we spend to run this service.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chandwali. John, yeah, can you expand a bit on the savings and what we're, not recruiting to, and what that actually means, and what service is going to be impacted as a consequence? Because that would really be good. Thank you very much for highlighting that, because I couldn't even see it.
I think I will have to revert and write to you to give you the answer as to what service, unless Barry knows. Okay.
Yeah, I think I do. I think the vacancy, first of all, apologies. I don't know why, because I think the description should have been in there. They certainly were in earlier versions, so I'm not sure what's happened. The vacancy, I think I'm right in saying, is a data analyst post that we haven't recruited to. So it's essentially, it's a valuable post. It helps support the directorate with doing detailed data analysis across the whole range of services that we have. But given where we are financially, given looking at what we can do with the existing resources, we've decided to hold that vacancy and release that saving effectively.
Can you please?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's my
move your,
yeah,
because I didn't hear anything you said. I just heard a so
probably the most profound thing I think I've ever said to council. So, no, I was just confirming that I think it's a data analyst role. There should have been descriptions in there. I'm not sure why they weren't, so apologies, but I think they were in earlier versions for each of the savings. The vacancy is a role that's helpful, it's useful, but it's one that we've considered across the NRE that we can probably manage without.
Okay, so therefore, once that person goes, it's not going to be.
It's a vacancy, so there isn't
a vacancy, so nobody's going to be in.
We're holding the vacancy in order to.
Okay. Okay. Is there any other question concerning that? No. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll be swiftly moving on to. There are no new revenue growth proposals concerning the climate and community related budgets, and so there is no Appendix 4. Can finance officers now introduce Appendix 5, new revenue savings proposals on page 89 of the agenda pack?
Happy to. For 24-25, as you can see, there's £2.175 million of proposed savings stroke income. and we use terms synonymously. The biggest saving as such is in the change to the operational arrangements in the libraries, and I'm sure that Jess will be able to speak to that in much more detail than I could. There are a few, as a minor £30,000 proposal to stop providing hard copy newspapers. Again, that sits within the library arena. We're proposing £1.3 million, which is of income, which is a review of the fees and charges, a review of the parking services, and to optimise the deployment of civil enforcement officers to ensure the level of enforcement in all areas is as it should be, and that's proposed or estimated at to generate additional £300,000. And then at the bottom, finally, there's £170,000 assumed income, which arises from the additional income as a byproduct of activity associated with the School Streets programme. Okay, I must emphasise, as I'm sure Barry would emphasise, were he speaking, that both the 1.3 and 170,000 are not revenue. They're not there for revenue generating. They are there as a financial function of the policy decisions that are being made around how we manage school streets and how we manage the parking and traffic infrastructure within the borough. I think it's quite important that we make that point. And then obviously those savings, some of those and the additional savings we have kick in future years. So in 25, 26, we're looking at self-service technology in libraries, but that's going to take a little while to kick in. And that's the only one that we have for 25, 26 and 26, 27. So a limited number of savings proposals here. But in the context of what we need, a very welcome contribution to reducing the council's expenditure level.
Have you got any questions or comments? Because I've got them as well. So anything for the cabinet members to add to anything here, please, before we ask the questions? My apologies. I think I jumped the gun.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on the proposals that we've put forward. So the first is around reducing the library opening hours across the borough. We are really proud of our libraries here in Haringey. We haven't had to make changes to them during the last 13 years of austerity, but we are now having to look at the opening hours. At the moment, we've got some of the longest opening hours in London, and the proposals really are around opening hours in days in the libraries that are based on kind of analysis of footfall to make sure that they are continue to stay open primarily during the afternoons or later in evenings when they're used by younger people for study space, especially when they're living in overcrowded accommodation. I just want to kind of caveat it by saying that obviously we're not proposing to close any libraries at all, and we don't want to be in that position. So this is why we've brought these proposals forward at this point. It's about maintaining the libraries and the buildings that we've got and looking at how they can be used in different ways by different parts of the community as well. So in terms of the opening hours, I'm going to stop there. The second proposal is around the introduction of self-service technology or looking at community-run libraries. And the reason that we've brought this forward is that we think that in some parts of the borough, this could be implemented. There are some very strong user groups and friends of libraries who in some libraries are actually starting to kind of support libraries in the way that we would like to move forward in the future with these proposals. There are lots of other boroughs and actually other parts of the country, other councils in other parts of the country that have introduced self-service technology. So we would be able to learn quite a lot from them and how they've done this. We would want to look and carry out a feasibility study of how it could be introduced in each library and work very closely with the communities that use them, as well as the friends groups that are part of the library community as well, to understand how that could be introduced in a way that would suit that library on an individual basis and tailored around how those libraries are used at the moment.
Thank you. Jess, did you want to contribute something?
In the interest of time, Chair, I'm happy just to answer questions so we can focus on the things you're really concerned about.
Well, I'll go first with my question. My question is that we The reason why we have the opening hours because we've got one of the most needy populations, the most marginalized communities, and libraries are not only used for just getting books. I'm quite concerned and curious to understand why this saving was for this area of our community, because people rely on the libraries for warmth. I've been a social worker for 30 years, and that is what people do. They go to the libraries for warmth. There's a lot of homelessness in the borough. There is a lot of need for children. I work with children now to go and do their studies because they're living in, even the ones who are not homeless are living in extremely cramped conditions. And that is their hope for social mobility. And if we do not, if that is curtailed, what is going to happen to them? And I'm curious to understand why there wasn't other areas that they wanted to, you know, have cuts in or reduce, so to speak. So maybe you can answer my question. Thank you.
So I think it goes back to the point I was making, is that when we are not going to be closing any libraries, we want to make sure that we are opening at the peak hours that people are using them at the moment. And there's already been quite a lot of analysis around the footfall and the times of days that different people are using the libraries. There is further work to do to understand exactly which parts of our population across the borough are using them and for the reasons for that and how we can mitigate that. So we've looked at both the branch libraries, which are the larger libraries, and some of the smaller libraries and how they're being used at different times of the day. And you can see quite clearly that in the morning, there's quite a small number of footfall or people using the libraries, and that really does drop off at the end of the day between 6 and 7 in the evening. So we need to make sure that we are keeping those libraries open during those peak times. We'd want to do further analysis across the borough with the different libraries to understand exactly who's using them at different times, and that work would be going on as we kind of move on in the future.
Just want to do one question before I take it over to the floor. Are you doing any qualities impact assessment when you're doing that?
So Jess is going to answer.
Yeah, we absolutely will do an equality impact assessment of this proposal, and what the point at which we'll do that will be when we have the detailed proposals for each library, because we do anticipate that there will be slightly different arrangements in different libraries. So we'll want to do the impact analysis looking at the users of those particular libraries. So we'll look across the service and indeed at the impact in particular libraries. The other thing I just wanted to pick up was in relation to your question about the different ways that people use libraries, which I completely agree with, is absolutely right. And I suppose the reflection that we've had in coming to putting this proposal forward is that so long as we hold on to the buildings, we can find other ways of keeping the buildings open, because if somebody's coming in there just to sit for warmth or because they're studying, that doesn't necessarily need a whole wraparound library service with library staff. It needs the building to be there and to be available as a public service community hub. So that's what we'll be doing, is trying to work with other services to look at what other services could be based in the libraries, could even be opening the library building so that they're still usable, but they would just not have the same level of library staffing in those buildings. So we think there are ways of mitigating the reduction in library opening hours per se.
Press the wrong button. Thank you very much. And I, Ian Sygrave, Councillor Dunstall. Gina is on there as well. And Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Chair. Just one quick question about the newspaper proposal. I've done a totally unscientific sort of drop into some libraries, but it's something which reinforced what I suspected anyway, and that is that there is a particular demographic which read newspapers. It's people like me, who are older people, who were brought up on newspapers and who don't like reading them online or can't read them online. And I'm just a bit concerned. I mean, I hear all you've said about 16.3 million, all the rest of it, and every little helps, but this is actually a tiny drop when you look at the amount of money it's going to save. And I just wonder if it's not going to have, well, I think it will have a disproportionate impact on one particular demographic who actually, you know, derive a great deal of pleasure from sitting in a warm environment reading the daily paper.
Thank you. Yeah, we have thought about that and the impact that it would have on that specific population, and we are having conversations around if there is a possibility of some of those hard copies being retained and what those would be as well. We do realise that the press reader is not ideal for everyone. No, not everybody likes using it, and there may be a need to keep some of those hard copies available in the libraries.
There's one other sort of element of that, of the sort of equalities impact of it, is though that what Press Reader enables us to do is to stock a much wider range of titles than we would ever be able to stock in hard copy. So there are portions of the borough, particularly those for whom English is not their first language, who maybe want to read titles and newspapers from their home countries, and Press Reader does enable them to do that. So it is a valuable part of it, of giving you know, the widest possible offerings. So you know, there are pros and cons to the digital offer, but we do recognise it's not for everybody.
Can I ask, there is a sense of digital poverty, especially amongst some younger people, mothers, single mothers, who do not have access, and some sections of the community who this press release they wouldn't know how to use. When they go in, will people be able to be there to support them so that they can gain access and it's accessible?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I think who was the next? Was it Gina? Gina?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I'm not there physically and I join you online. My question is the same as my friend Ian. It is about the newspapers, and I agree with his comment. It's just a small amount of money. But I agree about, you know, being, you know, a lot of what the officers have said. But the problem is, people who go to the libraries to read the newspaper, they go for the warmth, yes, but they can't use, you know, the laptops or the computers. They can't read online. They don't know how to do it. They don't know. A lot of them don't speak English or read English or both. And they like to sit there and chat among themselves, as reading newspapers in their own languages, basically. And if you take that away, it's on one hand, you're talking about having the libraries and open to the communities, but some of the communities you are going to chase away by simply taking away the newspapers, I think. And I know, for instance, with Green, they have I don't know if it's still going on, but we used to have tables, and we used to have a table with Turkish-speaking people and Greek-speaking people, and another table with another language. So those people didn't speak the language. They read in their own languages, and they stayed there, and it was a social event for them. It was in the warmth, and the savings is very small amount of money, I have to say. And I will consider that again. I am very concerned about that. As for the hours, I do agree that some are, you know, sometimes they're quite libraries and they should be used, you know, for different reasons. And I'm not against that. It's some other local authorities, they have volunteers as well, and community groups, you know, in the libraries, and it's. I mean, yes, I'm not against that at all. But when it comes to small amount of money, but it will affect the vulnerable, the older people, people without language skills, I think it worries me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I think in a synopsis, what Gina's saying, that the cost, not everybody could hear very well, Gina, but I'll just repeat. Put your hand up if I'm saying it right. What Gina is emphasizing is it's just such a small cost saving, but it's going to have a major impact on a section of the community that is already isolated, and you're going to further isolate them. From someone who works in mental health, isolation is one of the prerequisites for people becoming mentally unwell. So in regards to that, can we please reconsider looking into whether we can be a bit more creative and allow this part of the paper reading and in the libraries to actually stand? So we'd like that to go back as a recommendation. Am I right, Gina?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I did see many hands go up, so please guide me. Councillor Dunstall, and then Councillor Carroll, and then Councillor Coverwell. Thank you.
I've got a number of questions. Is that legit?
Yeah, but be
Super
fast,
swift,
Councillor
super
Dunstall.
swift. So first two are with regard libraries, and the reduction in hours and all of that. Understand the challenges that we face. Absolutely understand that. I would like to know, or I'd like to ask, what alternative proposals were put forward and refused, or rejected, before we landed on this wholesale answer of reduction in hours, because it's difficult for me to get on board with it when I don't know what else was discussed. Second one is still sticking on libraries. Can you provide a bit more detail as to how you would anticipate making those savings in 24-25? I'm assuming that, you know, we're now in middle of December. There will need to be consultations, redundancy notices, wholesale restructure of services. You know, is it realistic, or do these things usually start and finish and become implemented in a 3-month window? What is our redundancy liability? Like, what is the breakdown between vacancies, agency, and actual staff? So what are the numbers of redundancies we're looking at? And what are the posts that we're simply looking at deleting? So I guess that's an immediate saving that can be made, isn't it? Moving off of libraries, onto the fees and charges piece. I understand, I think I understood what you said, John, about them not being savings, but being the result of changes in policy. And I guess I'm asking, is it realistic to achieve those savings in 24-25? Sorry, those reductions as a result of policy in 24-25. And how is it the case that some of those do not have like impact in follow-on years? Excuse me if I'm sort of for my ignorance there. And then lastly, again, school streets, similar sort of question. Would we not expect some of that saving to be either tapered or visible in additional years as well? That's it.
Did you follow all of that? Okay, good. Go, Councillor.
Yeah, because we're going to do tag team on this. So in terms of the other options which were discussed and refused, we did discuss one of the options was around closing libraries, and we definitely do not want to be in that situation. We want to keep our libraries open. As I said right at the beginning, we are really proud of them and proud that we have safeguarded them over the last 13 years in a way that a lot of other boroughs and councils haven't been able to do that. We've actually invested in them. So the last 2 libraries that are being refurbished and updated are in Muswell Hill and Highgate, and they will be reopened in spring. So we don't want to be in the situation of having to close any of those libraries which we've invested in and upgraded. So those were the other options that we looked at. In terms of how savings will be made, we are carrying a lot of vacancies at the moment and fixed term contracts. And I'm going to hand over to Jess at this point to provide more detail about what we are looking into.
Thanks very much. So as I said, what we need to do is look in detail at the footfall in the different libraries and work out what the different ways of making this sort of target saving might be. And so it will involve looking at different opening hours across all of the different libraries, and that will affect the number of staff affected and the number of potential redundancies. And obviously we want to avoid redundancies as far as we can. We have, as Councillor Arkell said, got a number of vacancies in the service at the moment. So around 19 vacant posts. That's not 19 full-time posts, because what you see in the library workforce is a number of part-time hours and people who just do different sorts of contracts, whether it's weekend working or whatever. So but we are carrying lots of vacancies. Obviously you'd expect that because we've had this rolling programme of library closures, so we don't want to keep people on the books when we have obviously the libraries have been closed as they've been refurbished. So we do have a number of vacancies, and that will mitigate the need for redundancies quite considerably, we think. And we are holding vacancies and just appointing people on fixed term contracts where we absolutely have to in order to keep libraries open, which obviously we will have to look at over the next few months as Muswell Hill and Highgate reopen. So we will seek to as I say, mitigate redundancies. We'll go through the sort of analysis process in the background. Once, obviously, members have to make the final decision, and we wouldn't begin any formal consultations until that's done. We would hope to begin that swiftly if members do take this decision. And then, as you say, if there's then a restructure, we would carry that out and hope to implement partway through. So I don't think we would get a full year effect next year, but as I say, because we have vacancies, there's a sort of a level of saving in the library staffing budget in any case. So we will obviously work our hardest to make the saving and carry out the consultation in a fair and transparent way.
Thank you. Sorry, the other thing to add to that is to mitigate any impact that it might have on staff that are working in the library service at the moment as well.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm also going to call on tag teaming from Barry or John. So George, Councillor Dunstall, you have asked quite a lot of questions there, and you made it out to be one, but there were quite a few. So I'm just going to unpick it a little bit. There are actually 3 proposals being blended into one here to make £1.3 million. So one of the things that we have done this year with the fees and charges is we haven't just done an arbitrary, yeah, we'll put everything up by 10%, because we've been doing that for a few years, and it's really good every kind of leap year to kind of look at what other boroughs are doing. What we have found is we are considerably truly behind what we charge for parking compared to our neighbouring boroughs or comparative boroughs across London. So to put that into perspective, we charge 97p an hour to park. A lot of our neighbouring boroughs and a lot of our comparable boroughs are charging up to £1.50 an hour. If we just went up by 10%, which is 10p, we would still be behind them, and they would still be going up next year as well. So we do this exercise where we look at comparisons for all of the like-for-like products. An hourly visitor permit is something you get in every borough, so that's quite easy. But some of the other things we offer is not what other people offer. So, for example, we offer daily permits. Some boroughs don't offer daily permits. So some of it is a bit hard to kind of compare kind of solely like that. So it was quite a laborious exercise for the team. They're not happy about the suggestion that I think we should do that more regular than a leap year. But that's how we've come up with the fees and charges. So that's one thing happening there. In terms of the enforcement, we have been very, very open and blatant about the fact that we will go after people who are involved in blue badge fraud. We have invested a considerable amount of money in technology that can tell you straight away on the street that somebody's blue badge is stolen or is being used fraudulently, or to be honest with you, if you see some of these, they look like photocopies and it's a bit obvious. But before, a traffic warden will look at it and think, I'm going to take a number down, go back to the office, double check it on the system, come back, car's gone, finished. And we're doing really, really huge operations out there. And so I guess that's where some of our policy is leading to another third of the savings. The other one is nighttime enforcement, as we spoke about earlier. That's another policy that we're clamping down hard on. I think the third thing that's happening here is that we are making sure that our parking is not something we substitute. Most boroughs make sure, and why they're charging £1.50 an hour to park is so that parking is a service that they offer that doesn't cost them any money to run. We're not. We're still actually needing to take money out of the general funds to run. If I can just spend 30 seconds just to put things into perspective. the council make £35 million a year from parking. And so while I appreciate that 1.3 million sounds like really excessive in comparison to how much we are making as a borough, that is quite a small proportion. In comparison to how some of our neighbouring boroughs and what they're making out of parking and not needing to actually spend any to deliver parking, we are very much behind by quite a bit of millions. So I guess this is here to rectify that. What I will say though is it's not costing us 35 million to run a parking service. The Road Traffic Act ring fences all the money that we get, and our biggest bill is concessionary travel, especially freedom passes, which cost us nearly £20 million a year. So every time we have to pay that bill will come. So after we've paid that, after we've put in all the infrastructure, the technology, paying the CEOs, etc., we are at a loss. And so we're trying to make sure we have full cost recovery from our budget. I think there might be other things that Barry might want to add. And if there isn't, Barry, just remember it's because you taught me really well. I can't even drive, by the way. I learned all of this from him.
Thank you very much. That was very good. There isn't very much to cover in terms of the saving. Actually, I think you've covered that off very well. Thank you. There was a question about the profiling, though, wasn't there? I think on both the school streets and on the fees and charges one. So just if I can, and John, you might want to help me out here, but my understanding of it is that once we make a change, so that first year change, that's effectively a material amendment to the base budget. So that 1.3 million in the first year means that in future years, there's an expectation that there will be an additional 1.3 million every year. So if you were to put 1.3 million in the next year, it would assume 2.6 and so on, because it would aggregate that saving. So once that adjustment's been made, then the expectation is that additional income continues. And there was a question around, how deliverable is it from the start of the financial year? Well, the modelling that we've done, again, it depends on when we make the changes, assuming that changes are made at the start of the financial year, would suggest that that's the type of income difference that we would get as a combination of all of those amendments, effectively. So there's been a degree of testing around some assumptions and what we would get in terms of price elasticity. And it would suggest, yes, that isn't something to be particularly concerned about in terms of deliverability. On the school streets one, it's the same principle in terms of that first year adjustment, and that continues throughout the rest of the medium-term budget strategy period. The only other thing to sort of add in there is that we do expect to see a programme of new cameras coming online in the future. So we've got cameras that will be coming in next year, hence the change. We do expect additional ones to come in. However, there's also two factors. One factor is around compliance. So we do see higher levels of compliance with schemes like that. So whilst you might see some enforcement levels drop off and therefore income drop off, with the next round of cameras coming in, that should effectively net off. But also there's a whole bit around schools wanting them. So we go through a consultation and engagement exercise for each of the schools that we introduce the schemes at. And actually, if there isn't support that's adequate in terms of the location, or there are issues that come up throughout the consultation period, that also potentially means we can't put a camera. So we just need to manage that risk as well. I think that covers everything.
Please go ahead, Mike.
Just add one thing. I know it wasn't, but it was mentioned earlier by John, and I just think it's really important just to underline the fact that, with the school streets as as one example, the aim is not to obviously have an income from them. I mean, the idea is that ultimately what we want to see is zero fines on those. They are about road safety, and especially, well, they're about more than road safety, about air quality as well for our most vulnerable residents. So I think it's unfortunate that we see that in our base budget, frankly, but that is just the way. There are people that would be willing to prioritise their journey time over the safety of children.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Because I need to go ahead. Make them very quick because I'm just trying to keep on the clock as well. Thanks.
So my question is on the two library savings, but predominantly on the first one. And I appreciate the efforts that have been put in to produce the most equitable way of reducing hours. I just wonder if there's been any considerations of collecting data other than purely footfall to push into this decision. Namely, I think the conversation that's been had already is what's the purpose that people are using it for? Because it strikes me that in the early hours, it could be different in the later period in the day. Studying after school happens obviously in the after school period, and that will affect, it might not necessarily address the opening hours in year one, but in terms of when we're looking forward and reshaping the library's service, about who needs to be the cost implications of what services are in demand at what times during the day. And then we've talked a lot about on what days, and we've talked about at what times during what days, but there's also another aspect. I think this feeds into the school calendar somewhat, and how we've talked about having spaces for people fitting them with the school year, and when there's greater demands on studying. Has there been any consideration as to having sort of a dynamic model of opening hours as it pertains to times during the school year? And also going on to that, our most vulnerable who have will have additional demands when it is particularly cold for access to a warm space, or in the summer when it's particularly hot. But whereas September and April might not be such a high priority. But that's all.
Quick response, please.
Yeah, so we have met with the Friends of the Libraries groups already to start the conversation with them, and there is going to be a very detailed piece, and we're going to be going out to each of those individual libraries to understand exactly how they're used and who they're being used by. So that would input into the overall analysis and the feasibility study that we want to do around this. So we are looking at data other than just footfall. We're looking at how different libraries are used on different days of the week and the weekend as well. I think the other thing to mention is this kind of links into it, but how libraries are how they are being used and how that's changing. So we know in terms of just looking at use and of things like audiobooks and ebooks in the last, I think, 12 months, the use of that has trebled when we've looked at the data. So that's something else that we're taking into consideration about how basically how libraries and their use is changing in recent years, and particularly post-pandemic as well. Jess, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I mean, the point about ebooks, I think, is really instructive that people are reading still, but in different sorts of ways. And obviously, people don't need to visit a library to check out an ebook. But I think the other thing to add is that one of the things we'd want to do is talk to other services about how they might want to use the building spaces, so that if we can see, for example, that there's a lot of use in a particular branch library by parents and small children, and we can see that the children's library has really good usage, say in the mornings, but is not well used by other groups, then it might be as useful for us to talk to, for example, early years services, to say, well, why don't you come and run some of your services out of the children's library? That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to have library staff there, but we would still be meeting the need of the demographic in that local area, which has use for the space for parents and small children. So I think we do want to be creative and and look for exactly the sort of things that you mentioned in terms of sort of term time usage. We know the libraries are actually quieter during the holidays, which is quite interesting. But there's a lot of use in the summer during the run up to exams. So I think we're very alive to that. We know that our libraries are used in lots of different ways.
Is the flavour of the next two questions, they similar to the ones that have gone before? Is it completely different? Oh, and Councillor Culver.
Thank you. When my daughter she's in university now, but when she was small, she used to go to the North Finchley Library, and there used to be a lady there that used to teach the little kids singing lessons, or just singing, and almost all of them thoroughly enjoyed it. Are we trying to encourage that kind of things for the toddlers?
Yes, I think we've already kind of touched on it about using our libraries in very creative and different ways. And I think there's probably, I mean, we have just recruited 2 new assistant directors for culture and creativity, and part of their roles will be looking at libraries. And the other creative ways that they could be used, and going out and looking at other boroughs and other councils and how they've kind of used those library spaces for a whole range of community activities to support different parts of the community. So that's certainly one idea that we could think of in the future.
And will you be updating us on that?
Yes, we will be.
Jolly good. Thank you.
Can we concentrate on the recommendations? What recommendations have you got to before we wrap this up? Part of it. Councillor Crawley Harrison.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave with my questions first and then recommendations. So I'd like to know the detail of how the savings are actually being realised by only part-time opening, because there's no savings on business rates. There's very little savings on energy and that sort of thing. So where are the savings coming from? And in particular, in regards to staffing, where are they coming from? If you already have so many significant vacancies, they'll be built into this year's budget. So I'm wondering where they're coming from as well. George asked about other options explored. You said that the other option explored was closures. What other options were explored? Was revenue raising from the libraries explored at all? Because my library, Hornsey Library, is massively underused. The library staff will comment heavily that it's underused. There are spaces that have arisen from the £6 million capital investment that are not used, that could easily be rented out. On the proposal to introduce self-service technology, I'm wondering what that is, because we have self-service check-ins, check-outs, drop-offs already. I can go to my library and use it completely staff-free if I want to. So exactly where are those savings coming from in regards to self-service? And on that, what's the cost of introducing the new technology? And is that built into the savings that are being shown here, or are those costs seen elsewhere in the budget? And how does that balance out? And finally, I just want to know, you say you've got footfall data already, how that's been, how sophisticated is that? Has that actually been gathered, or is that just kind of asking staff or whatever? Thanks.
Thank you. Who's going to take that?
Can I take the last one first, and then I'll try and answer those. So in terms of the footfall data, that is being collated literally by people who are crossing the threshold into those libraries, and we've picked a day. Yeah, we've picked a week in November, which obviously wasn't in half term, it was in the school term holidays, to give us an outline of how the libraries were being used in that specific week of this year. So the feasibility and the analysis that we want to look into would go into a lot more detail. It wouldn't just obviously pick one particular week, because that could be you know, kind of, I guess, misleading in terms of how it's being used. We want to gather much more detailed information. In terms of where the savings are coming from, I think we've already touched on that, and that is, Jess, I don't think there's any more detail. It is around the vacancies that we're holding at the moment, and some of the fixed term contracts that would come to an end. In terms of, I think, income generation, which is what we're talking about, that is again going back to thinking about how the libraries could be used by different services and different communities that could be run out of them. But I think there probably is a piece of work that needs to be done around other ways to generate income to come into the libraries. I think the way libraries have been used certainly since the pandemic has really changed, and there is something that we need to do to go back and review how different communities want to use them, how they can be hired out in different ways, different kind of trusts, and I think funding opportunities that could be brought into the library, having writers in residence in some libraries as well. So there's lots of different ideas that we've got that we want to kind of probe and look into in a bit more detail, and that's where our two assistant directors for culture and creativity will be bringing their expertise. They've got very commercial backgrounds, and I'm sure that they will be able to help us think about that in the future.
Yeah, just to add to that, Councillor Kelser answered virtually everything. We do have income targets already for the library service of I think it's between £250,000 and £300,000 a year, and part of the purpose of the rationale for the refurbishment was to make the spaces across all the branch libraries more accessible, to put in lifts, to refurbish them, to make the spaces more attractive to hiring out. So we do need to do more work, and that's, as Councillor Arkell has mentioned. So that will be part of what we do, but we have historically struggled to meet those income targets. So I don't think it would have been robust to add in additional income targets when we're, not yet meeting the ones that we'd had previously, and they are gradually recovering. But they obviously took a big dip during the pandemic. So that is a piece of work that's ongoing anyway. The self-service technology is about access to the buildings, so you can obviously check in and check out books, return them without staff engagement, but you still need staff to open the buildings to provide that security. So the technology is the kind of swipe card like you get in to bank foyers to go and use ATMs. So it's, you would access the building through a swipe card, which would be your library card. But that's the technology that needs to be invested in, and CCTV as well. So there are lots of things to explore. We've flagged that there would need to be capital investment. That hasn't been costed yet. We do need to do a lot of work next year to explore whether these savings in future years are feasible, whether they are the direction that we want to go in. As I say, they would be obviously confirmed as to whether they're deliverable and to what degree for future years' budgets. What's in at the moment is a sort of indicative based on what we've seen that other boroughs have been able to achieve, but we would need to do a lot of work next year to investigate the feasibility of those. And just on your point about, as Councillor Arkell said, about the savings are coming from staffing salaries. They're not coming from any buildings related costs, because we are retaining the buildings and hoping to keep them in use. The vacancies that we have at the moment are, we don't require those vacancies to be filled, because, as I said, we've had rolling programme of libraries being shut. As they come open, if we do nothing in terms of the opening hours, then we will have a pressure unless we can hit the income targets, because that obviously hits our bottom line. So we absolutely need to look at how those vacancies are held. But what we've been doing is using agency or fixed term contracts rather than recruit permanently, where we've needed them to maintain the opening hours as is, but without putting obviously ensuring that staff are not unnecessarily at risk. So the savings are all from salaries.
Thank you very much. There's been a number of recommendations. I couldn't keep up with them all. They're all written down. The oversight ones, which we would like you to reconsider, is the opening hours, and also the tangible newspapers that are in there, because that's going to have basically zero cutting of the budget, and it's going to be a comfort to people who are so used to it. So that's the other recommendation and the thing. And yes, those are the two. And there's other. Go ahead, Councillor Crawley. Last one, please.
Yeah, just to be clear on recommendations, I'd like to see you come back with clarity that it's staff that you're looking at. That's the saving, and how many staff. That's on line item 1 there. And on the second one, that you haven't actually costed the capital investment on the saving there. So either come back with absolute clarity on that, or provide that information, because to me, without that, the numbers are meaningless, really, ultimately, because they're not really those savings, because there will have to be some investment there. So they would be my 2 recommendations.
That's a question, not a recommendation.
No, it's not. I'm not asking them to respond. I'm just asking them to come back with those when it comes back to Cabinet in March.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, just to say, we can also have that come back to scrutiny on the 18th. Yeah, so it'll come through before you make your final recommendation, so we can add it to the 18th of January meeting.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for that very robust discussion. And we are swiftly moving on to the next agenda item, which is, can finance officers now introduce Appendix 6, which is a draft capital programme on pages 91 to 92 of the agenda pack. Thank you.
Okay. On page 91, you've got lots of rows and schemes that are in black, and there's one at the bottom in a different colour. So the schemes above are the existing MTFS programme that you've seen before. It's been around for quite a while. So the new ones, we're looking to have additional investment over the MTFS period in borough roads, and that's set out there. The public protection to replace a life expired IT system. This is in the public protection space, and it's a system that will enable, I think it's going to fold into the general customer relationship management, the ability to report things more easily, and to sort of automate a lot of processes. So that's what that's for. We've previously discussed the library's IT and buildings upgrade for the localities hub. So I don't want to say anything more there. Bruce Castle condition works. There's an allocation of funding of 450 for each next 2 years. We currently have a project going on which is part funded, very partly funded, increasingly less funded by Arts Council England, with a building of Bruce Castle's nature. As soon as you touch the wall or do anything, you uncover horrors of years of the building being there. So with that project, we have found that we've had more to do, but there are also things that that should be done now that are more effective and more efficiently done when we're opening up these areas in the building. So that's what we're doing with that, and I'm sure Jess will be able to talk more to that. For Alexandra Palace, the counter-terrorism works. It's a statutory requirement that for a building of that size that has those activities that goes on post Manchester, but it needs to have certain works done. Otherwise, it would be not be able to do what it does. There are health and safety works, which for Alexandra Palace, there's always health and safety works that need to be done, and compliance work. So the difference between this, the compliance works would be to make the building more accessible to people with various disabilities, whereas the health and safety works would be works that are done to stop concrete falling off the front of the building. So I just want to make that distinction, because you could say, well, why are those two things? And that's a distinction that I'd like to make there. We previously spoke earlier about the Alexandra Palace investor earn proposal. This will be, as I say, a loan to the palace, which, subject to that business case being put forward to us, we would then advance the loan, the work to be undertaken, and then they would look to repay us out of the revenue streams that go with that. So those are the new proposals that are going in this area, and I'm happy to take questions. If, okay.
Before the questions, please can the cabinet members add their comments or make any additions to what's been said? Nothing to add, contribute. Okay. Please can we have any questions? Councillor Crawley, Harrison.
Thanks. The Selby project, is that a mixed development? I thought that had housing and things like that. Is that a mixed development project? And if so, what explicitly does the 34 million here relate to? I'll bundle all my questions together, actually. The walking and cycling ones, they're all borrowing first year external funding later years, presumably from TfL. I would assume. Is that reliant on Haringey's investment in the first year, and is the TfL money committed? And then some recommendations, if I may. When we have source of funding and it's mixed source, can we make that very clear? Because, for example, on those, they're mixed, but it's listed as external, even though the first year is not, it's Haringey borrowing. Yeah. And also the impact on the treasury account, as we discussed last time, the impact of borrowing on revenue is significant now. And I think it'd be good to make that absolutely clear here, which ones of these have that impact on the revenue. So and what that rate is. I think you said it was 72 per million as it stands this year. That's obviously very different to last year, which I think was 60, was it, or something like that. So maybe where those rates vary, you can also set those out. Maybe there's just an asterisk against the one which has the 72 per million, and then we know the impact of that. And then other ones, actually, if it's borrowed at a different rate, I think there was one here that mentioned it was borrowed at loaned at low interest rates, for example, where it's set out slightly differently, so we know the different implications, because it has that implication on the revenue account, and it's really important that I think we all understand that, whether it's Scrutiny, backbenchers, or hopefully cabinet members already do, but or the wider council and residents. Thanks.
Go ahead, Seema.
Chair, can I just check with the Democratic Services Manager whether Selby Urban Village should have been on this, because it's actually a housing project. And the only reason that I ask is because I need to recuse myself because I work for the Selby Trust.
Yeah, it does seem a housing related item. I don't know if that's an error.
Right.
Yeah, John.
Okay. The Selby project, the Urban Village project, when it was first envisaged, was the community facilities.
Can we just, can I pause for a second? Yeah. Is it about the housing projects? If it is.
No.
Okay. Yeah, it might be best, Seema. Thank you.
Just to give a little bit of background, when the project was first put into the capital programme, there were two elements to it. There was the community centre and the sports facilities and the housing. At that time, it was envisaged that the whole project would be built out, and then the general fund would effectively sell the housing units to the HRA. Okay. A whole raft of changes and different thinking has gone on, and so now we're splitting into two phases. First phase is for the community centre and the sports facilities, and the second phase will be delivered by the housing delivery team in a housing revenue account. So what you see here is the cost of delivering the new Selby Centre and the associated facilities. I forget the name of the park now. There's a park, Bull Lane, thank you, which actually incidentally is in Enfield. So that deals with that, and then let's say the housing development will come along in the fullness of time. So, yeah, walking the cycling action plan. I must apologise. That is an incorrect there. That's an old description. These are now completely externally funded. Okay, I'll get that amended. So on the cost of borrowing issue, that is incredibly difficult, and there were two things. Very briefly. The interaction of the capital programme and the council treasury management strategy and arrangements is extremely complex and complicated. We do offer training on the TMSS, and we have offered training on the capital finance, the capital programme. We're due to offer, and we have offered an agreed training in the new year, which hopefully will explain the interaction between the capital programme, the treasury management statement strategy, and the council's general fund. Because we could put a number there, but it is an incredibly crude. And it could lead to confusion as well. Okay. Is that all of your things?
Any other questions?
Well, if no one else is, then just I'd like to give people a chance, but I mean, one of the recommendation would be where there is external funding, whether that's secured or not. That would be helpful to know as well. So, for example, the LIP funding, I think, is a year by year securing thing, Rob. So next year's presumably is reasonably secured, but future ones would be assumptions. So knowing that would be really helpful as well, not just on that, but anything that's external funded.
Okay, yeah, that should be possible.
There's no other questions. Then I would like to say thank you everyone for your participation. Democratic Services will compile the recommendations and send it to the panel members in the next few days, and these will go forward to the OSC on the 18th of January. Work programme update. Any questions on the work plan? Are there any questions on the work plan at all? Okay. Number 10, items of urgent business. Okay.
Well, question on the work plan was there's nothing scheduled.
Please check page 113.
February 27th is the next one. It says cabinet member questions. Is that Sorry, wasn't there mention of one in January? Oh, right, okay, sorry.
That's the overview and
thank
scrutiny panel. That's when we meet all together.
I thought that's what Adam was deferring the meeting to, but.
Okay, then, thank you. So there's no items of urgent business, and the future meeting dates, as I said before, the next meeting for the Climate, Community Safety and Culture panel will be on the 27th of February 2024. I now close the meeting if somebody can give me the time. And the meeting is closed at 8:09. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.